Hello and welcome to Tucson Festival of Books 2023. My name is Carl and I'm from the Pima County Public Library. And I'm here with some teens from the Dusenberry-River Library's Teen Advisory Board. And they are going to interview E. Lockhart, author of Family of Liars. Take it away.
All right, so to start off, tell us about Family of Liars, just like a general summary, and what inspired you to write it?
Well, Family of Liars is a prequel to a novel that I published in 2014 called We Were Liars. And it is set in 1987, and it is the story of three sisters who are part of a family that owns a private island. And they spend summer after summer on this island with their extended family. And the summer that the protagonist, Carrie Sinclair, is 16, their lives are upended by the arrival of a literal boatload of cute boys in one room. And these cute people arrive and move into the guest house and they basically won't leave. And things get very, very dark from there. So it's a thriller, but it also has like summer vibes and a romantic element to it. I was inspired to write it because a strange thing happened to me during the pandemic, which is that people started making TikTok videos about We Were Liars, in which they cried. They were like, snot was coming out of their noses, mascara running down their faces, they were like heaving in sobs. Sometimes they liked the book, sometimes they hated it, they were super mad. You know, the one that I can remember was just this woman crying and it said, WTF this book. And so, you know, this was some 7 years after We Were Liars had come out, and all of a sudden it came back on the bestseller list and it had all these readers. And, you know, especially in this time of isolation and feeling like, you know, did I even still have a job? Were people still buying books? Or, you know, just a feeling of separation from my readers. All of a sudden, my readers were like reaching out to each other in this really creative and vulnerable way. And so this got me thinking about whether there was another story set in the world of We Were Liars that I might write.
So what were some of the main topics or themes you wanted to explore in Family of Liars?
Well, very often you figure out what themes you're exploring by writing. Like you don't think, oh, I want to write a novel about sisterhood. Because what are you going to say about sisterhood? Like, do you have a, like, you know, sisterhood is a messy thing. You don't have like a point that you're trying to make when you write a novel. But it is about four sisters, and one of them dies at the very beginning of the novel, which is not a spoiler, it happens very early. And her ghost has come back to visit Carrie. So Carrie is all the time talking to the ghost of her late sister. And so I was interested, you know, in these sibling relationships, especially in a family that, you know, kind of labels the children, as happens in so many families, right? Somebody is the student, and somebody is the athlete, and somebody is the good one, and somebody is the bad one, and somebody is, you know, the troubled one. And these labels can stick with us for a long time and can kind of box us in. And so, you know, even though this is a very rarefied family in terms of their wealth and their social position, some of the problems that they have are universal. Like, you know, how to get along with your sister that you both love and hate. So that's one of the themes. And I think a lot of my books are also about the question of what do you do with yourself when you have done something terrible? Like, if you have done something that is, you know, basically unspeakable, how can you go on, right? Can you forgive yourself? Should you forgive yourself? How do we live with the awfulness that is inside of us?
This question we're asking on behalf of someone who couldn't make it, and that was, how'd you go about the the topic of economic privilege in We Were Liars?
Well, a lot of times people assume that I grew up like the Sinclair family, and that is not true. And that's partly because of how I present. And the reason I present the way I present is that I was a scholarship kid at a lot of very fancy educational institutions. And my mom's side of the family is waspy middle class and East Coast. She grew up in Exeter, New Hampshire, in part. But my dad's side of the family is New York, Jewish, working class. And my parents divorced when I was really little, and my mom lived in communal living situations. She was a complete hippie. So we lived in this like hippie environment, single parent, or I lived in New York in my dad's little apartment, single parent. But I didn't live with my dad. That was just summers. And then sometimes we would go and visit my maternal grandparents on Martha's Vineyard. And we would spend a good couple of weeks there, many summers. And that, even though modest in comparison to the Sinclair family, that was a world of entitlement and privilege. It was a very white world. It was a world in which, my father as a Jewish person was other. And it was also, when I was a little kid, really idyllic, right? It was beach, it was raspberry bushes and corn picked off of your own corn plants, and big table with cousins at the dinner table and kids running, other kids. I was an only child, but other kids running around, and a sense of space and affluence that also felt very safe to me when I was small. But then as a teenager, I began to notice who wasn't there, what wasn't there, attitudes that I might not have noticed as a child. I began to, question and interrogate some of my grandparents' values, and this place that I do still love also had repellent elements for me. And so in We Were Liars, the character of Gat sits in that space, right, of loving something and also finding it repugnant at the same time, and wanting to shake it up but not lose the part of it that you love. And to me, that push and pull is much more interesting than just being like, oh, these people on their island that suck, right? So it's that, and then that position of being a scholarship kid at those kinds of schools. I'm often writing from central characters who operate with kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out of privileged institutions. So in the case of We Were Liars, the protagonist Cadence is from this family. She is completely in, 100%. But the Gat character is 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And in Genuine Fraud, there's a character who is, basically an imposter, who is pretending to be somebody that she's not. And it's a way of getting into this rarefied socioeconomic environment. And that's true in my Boyfriendless series too. And also it comes up all the time. So I think that's when you're in high school, being in that position can be awkward. It can make you feel insecure. It can make you feel out of place. It can make you want to hide things about your home life from your friends at school. As a novelist, that was a gift.
All right, and then, so you kind of touched on this earlier, but coming off of the fame of We Were Liars, how did the writing process differ between writing the two books?
Well, when I wrote We Were Liars, I had never written a thriller before, and that was very scary. All my other books have been comedies, and I was going out on a limb in terms of genre and the kinds of things that happen in that novel. But also, it's a very stylized book. Not everyone loves the way it was written. And I decided that I really wanted to commit to a pretty extreme mode of storytelling. and do the best job I knew how at that, knowing that there were going to be people who would find it very pretentious. And it took a while for me to like get the voice and this sort of sounds of the story the way I wanted them. And it was scary to put it out in the world because I knew that not everyone would like it. With Family Liars, I was sort of like, this is what I do already. Like I'd written a couple other thriller type books, and I felt more at home in that world, and I was coming back to a similar sort of set of conceits in terms of the writing style. So I didn't have to find my way in the same regard.
So what was your reasoning for placing the mottos throughout both Family of Liars and We Were Liars?
Well, I can't really say that like I reasoned it out like, oh, this would be a good thing to put in. I think I wrote a scene where Harris, the grandfather in We Were Liars, like quotes somebody, probably Disraeli, right? And never complain, never explain. All the mottos are quotes from famous people, and they are cited in the book in a very sort of sideways way, like I think maybe somebody said this or whatever. Except for, don't eat yellow snow is not a famous quote, and never eat anything bigger than your ass is also not a famous quote. But the other quotes, and mottos are from literature and famous speakers and stuff like that. But I think Harris just said one, and one of the things when you are writing a novel that you start to think about maybe after you've gotten going a little ways is what kinds of pressures the story world puts upon your characters. And these can be really obvious, right? Like if a character is enslaved, their story world is putting incredible, terrible pressure on every aspect of their lives. But they can also be much more invisible, right? And for the Sinclairs and We Were Liars and Family Liars, most of those story world pressures are invisible. They are expectations. They are ideas about women's roles. They are, ostensibly these young people could do anything they wanted, right? They've got all the money and all the education in the world and all the opportunity. And yet they are still enclosed one way or another. And Harris's mottos are one of the tools he uses to keep them where he wants them. So once he started talking Harris, then I started looking for mottos that he could, and then the kids, of course, it was only natural for them to sort of try to create their own rules for living as they start to want to break out of the relatively narrow paths that Harris has laid out for them.
So another question from the person who couldn't make it was, what was the significance of coding specifically throughout Family of Liars?
Well, both books are about substance abusers, right? And neither book is really a problem novel in the way that, we have a kind of whole subgenre in young adult of a problem novel where a teenager is struggling with any kind of relatable problem. And very often substance use is written about in kind of that format, right? That a friend or a parent or a protagonist is struggling with their relationship to the substance. And so Cadence and Carrie, the two heroines of those two books, are both drug dependent. And that affects our understanding of whether or not they are reliable narrators. They're always telling the truth as far as they understand it, right? But they are filtering the truth through a medicated haze. And so I was interested in destabilizing your sense of reality, and that was one of the tools I used. But I wanted Carrie's story to be different with regard to that drug use than Cadence's. And so that is the biggest reason that Family of Liars is told by an adult Carrie remembering her past, because that enabled me to show that later on she gets treatment for this drug use and recovers from it and yet still carries some of the weight of that and some of the behaviors that are problematic into her adult life, even while being mostly, even while being a non-drug user. So I couldn't have done that with a teenage character, and I did not want to just leave a teenage character popping codeine and sleeping pills on a regular, because I think that one of the things that my literature does that's different from grown-up literature is, some caretaking of the young reader. I wanted to offer the vision of recovery for that character, even if I was not going to wedge that into my thriller plot of her 17th summer.
Alright. Did you write the fairy tales for the same reasons in Family of Liars as you did for We Were Liars?
I think they function somewhat differently. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, because I know how you had said that in one of your interviews that you wrote the fairy tales like as a writing exercise to kind of like when you were in an off mood, you would just write the fairy tales to kind of get into the story without actually writing it.
Mm-hmm.
So did you kind of just write that to like keep the symmetry between the two books, or do you do it?
I mean, you're absolutely right that in We Were Liars, it was basically an avoidance behavior of, like, I should be writing my novel, but I don't know what happens next in my novel, so I'm going to write these fairy tales. I knew that I wanted to find some way to incorporate the fairy tale element in the prequel because I wanted the books to feel like they went together. But in the case of Family of Liars, I spent a lot of time looking for just 3 fairy tales that I could tell pretty accurately to the way that they are traditionally told in terms of their major plot points, right? I used Cinderella, The Stolen Pennies, which is a ghost story, and Mr. Fox, which is like a kind of a Bluebeard model tale where there's a very bad prince, basically. So in terms of the Bluebeard one, I mean, in Mr. Fox, I went looking for like stories of an evil suitor. And when I came across Mr. Fox, he also had such a juicy name. I was like, oh yes, Mr. Fox, thank you, universe, for giving me Mr. Fox. And I also, in terms of Stolen Pennies, I went looking for a ghost story. And I read a whole lot of fairy tales that had ghosts in them and picked one that I felt I could retell with nuances that would do the jobs that I wanted it to do in the story. Cinderella, I already knew.
So what was the process like of looking back into characters you didn't originally have plans for?
Oh gosh, I mean, it was honestly like this book, it was the pandemic, my husband was out of work, my kid was depressed on, Zoom school, it was a not a fun time, and I had it lucky, right? But we were all miserable in this house and apartment, and it was no good, and I knew I was really lucky to have a job. Like my husband couldn't work for 2 years. I was really lucky to have a job that I really liked. I was really lucky to have readers in this time when everything was so uncertain for so many authors. So I knew that I was like as lucky as an author could be, and I was also kind of miserable. And so I just like went into the world of this book. You know what I mean? I just tried to tell myself every day when I felt lazy or blocked or whatever, like how lucky I was to get to write this story at this particular crazy time that we were all in. So, I don't know if that's really an answer, but I just, it was more immersive, I think, right? I wasn't running out to meetings. I wasn't running off to, I wasn't inviting people, I have to lay after 5 because I had people coming over for dinner. Like nothing was happening except this book. And then like trying to keep my family cheerful. So it was a much more immersive experience than I usually have.
Who was your favorite character that you wrote about or explored in Family of Liars?
Is it terrible to say Pfaff? I really had fun writing Pfaff. I knew some boys like that. And so for people who haven't read Family of Liars, right? There's this boatload of cute people who show up on the island and send everybody into a tailspin, and Fef is the main romantic interest, and he's a very sort of flawed, cocky, funny, I think, bro kind of guy. And all does not go well with Fef, and you really should not love him too much at the end. But I really liked writing him. I felt like I wanted people to love him at the beginning, which meant that I spent a lot of time in every scene that he was in trying to make him funny, trying to make him charming, and yet still taking the time to show his thoughtlessness or his selfishness or his distractibility or his entitlement. Yeah, he's not my favorite as a human. I don't want to hang out with him in real life, but I had a really good time writing.
So when writing Family of Liars, how did your method of using narrative unreliability differ from humor liars when it came to writing out of amnesia versus storytelling?
Well, I think in both cases, in We Were Liars, Cadence is telling the audience the truth as far as she knows it. So she is never lying. And I've seen lots of people read the book as if she is an unreliable narrator in the typical sense of an unreliable narrator who decides to hold information back. But she is actually not holding anything back. She's telling you everything she knows as she knows it to the best of her ability. Carrie is telling the story of her 17th summer to her son. And when she tells the story to him, the shame is very deep, and she does not tell the story truthfully at the beginning. And so there's a point at which she decides that she's kind of gotten deep in enough that she's going to go back and say, well, I didn't really tell you the truth here. This is what really happened. And I tried to look for I didn't want people to feel like I just had a character lie and then change her mind and tell the truth, because that's a sucker punch move. I think I was looking for what are the emotional reasons that you might tell a story, I mean, the basic thing is something that children do all the time, right? Somebody knocked that lamp over and broke it, and it was not me, it was him, right? He did it. And they can convince themselves fully, right, that their brother did it. I mean, maybe not fully, but they can, you can really lean into a falsehood like that and get really entrenched, right? And almost forget that it's actually you who knocked the lamp over. So I tried to find that, the animosity between the sisters is part of the motivation, right, for that falsehood, and wanting to represent yourself as ethical as part of the to your son is part of the motivation of that falsehood. So I was looking to kind of not make it feel like that sucker punch of a lie.
You kind of talked about this earlier, but was the writing process different when writing out of the different spectrums of the what happened question? Like in We Were Liars, when the main character was attempting to figure out what happened, versus in Family of Liars, when the main character was trying to explain what happened.
I mean, you're absolutely right that there's a sense in which We Were Liars is like a whodunit, right? Something bad happened, somebody did something terrible, we know that, right? The question is, what is the terrible thing that happened, and who did whatever the terrible thing is. That's not the way that, there's no kind of detective figure at all in Family of Liars. And I think in some ways that made writing Family of Liars easier. I think having some kind of mystery that your teen protagonist is going to solve it's a very tricky narrative model to write, because it's not a detective story, and a teen protagonist cannot embark on detective activities, right? They don't have the capacity to buy airplane tickets, they don't have the access to police records, they don't have any of the things that your typical like detective type figure has who's an adult. And so I think when you look at sort of YA thrillers, there are some, like the Agathas, which Kathleen Glasgow and Liz Lawson are here, and their book, The Agathas, has, like, they're trying to solve a mystery. And it's really fun, it's a good read. But most YA thrillers shift away from that kind of more detective figure into like a domestic noir type of genre where the protagonist is like immersed in the thriller situation. And We Were Liars immerses Cadence also, but she does have a little bit of that detective thing. But it was very tricky, like, you know, what is she gonna do to solve this mystery? Is she going to go on the internet? Is she going to go to the library nearby and look up family newspaper records? Is she going to interrogate people? Like all of those things, every time I tried to write a scene where she did any of that, it was very awkward. And I ended up throwing it all in the trash.
When writing in general, what is your favorite stage of the writing process?
Oh my gosh. Every now and then there's a good day where like I just feel like I know what happens and I can just write it very like fluidly. It's like a flow. And then other days are really tough. So the good fluid days where it just kind of comes out of your brain.
So this is going to be very dark, but how did you come up with the murder scenes? They were very like...
In Family Liars?
Yeah. Or just in general.
Well, you know, in Genuine Fraud, there's a murder. And that book is inspired by a famous Patricia Highsmith novel called The Talented Mr. Ripley. And in The Talented Mr. Ripley, there are a couple murders in both books. But for the most part, like, I took the idea of The Talented Mr. Ripley, I made it contemporary, I made everybody female, I changed all the locations, and then I explored similar themes to Highsmith, but in my own way. So plus the book goes backwards, whereas The Talented Mr. Ripley goes forwards. So chronologically, it's totally different. But nonetheless, I wanted to find some way for my story to kind of kiss the Highsmith, so to speak. And so the way the first murder happens is almost exactly the same way as it happened in the Highsmith. Which, you know, spoiler alert, is on a rowboat, not a motorboat, and they with a war. Podcast, I just made a word smashing on the head motion. So that's how Ripley murders Dickie Greenleaf, and that is also how Jules Williams murdered Imogen Sokolov. And so in that case, what I was interested in, right after that sort of kiss to kiss of the murder mirroring Highsmith's murder, was what happens after that is absolutely specific to my version of this kind of tale, right? Like, what does my specific character do once she has murdered her friend? It was there that I really tried to like make this something that only I could have written that was, you know, completely different from how Highsmith would have and did treat the same scene. I'm also not a writer who, like, I don't want to spend a lot of time looking at like ballistics figures, and I'm not great with like fight scenes and things like that. So the murders in my books, I guess in Genuine Fraud there is a premeditated murder after that. But they're all with blunt objects. I feel like that's it's the crime of anger, right, or of resentment, or rage, or jealousy, or a crime of passion. And I guess to me that's like the most kind of visceral way that you might kill with someone. And it's interesting. I'm more interested, I guess, in what happens after, in that moment of regret. I mean, you know, the murder and family liars is over pretty quick, but then it takes forever for them to get rid of that body, right? It's like a 12-hour odyssey. I'm more interested in that, I think, than I am in the actual events.
So if you could live on their island, what would you like to do most?
Oh, on the Sinclair's Island? Well, honestly, I don't really want to live on that island. Bad things happen there. It's really pretty, it's a lot of ghosts. And no groceries. You know, you have to do all your shopping on the mainland and then cart it all in. But I do have a real fondness for that East Coast seashore landscape, you know, that you've seen in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and in Maine, like the sort of rocky shores and the turbulent dark sea. I find it just exquisitely beautiful and a little bit gothic and sort of scary. So I think honestly I just sit there and look at the ocean.
Okay, and then finally, which one of Tipper's parties would you like to attend the most?
Oh, I had so much fun with Tipper's parties. I think the best party is probably the lemon hunt. So in Family Liars, there's a lemon hunt party that they do every year where they cook all these lemony foods and lemony desserts, and everybody dresses in white and yellow, and they go out on the lawn, and they have like yellow and white patchwork quilts out on the lawn for people to sit in it on, and then they have hidden 100 lemons and 1 lime on the island. And everybody goes out with baskets and hunts for these lemons and limes. And then they have to, you know, meet up and make out and things like that on the lemon hunt. So yeah, definitely the lemon hunt. What about you?
I feel like the lemon hunt would be cool. The one where, I forgot what it was called, but where you have to like guess the name of the...
Oh, who am I? Yeah.
That one.
So it's a parlor game. Leads to lots of misery, but yeah. In the back of the Family of Liars paperback comes out on May 4th, 2023, and there's instructions for playing that game in the back.
And that was all
That's
the
it?
questions.
Is that it? Thanks for chatting with me. You guys prepared so beautifully. I appreciate it.